Hey module makers, I'm David, the creative director of Modulus. Welcome to Modulus Academy, where I give you my top tips for peak optimization. Today's topic is going to be freighters, so that's something you'll unlock a bit later in the game, but is kind of crucial if you want to have a clean factory and do big logistics over multiple islands. So what freighters usually are used for is to have some sort of hub of a resource you're producing somewhere and then distributing it into your factory without using skylines all over the place. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about, but let's first just set up a freighter and see how the whole mechanic works before we dive into more detailed things. So I have a spawner of coolant here, and we're going to distribute the coolant to another freighter. So first we place freighter down and then we hook it up, and it's really important to see to which dock you're delivering to, because that you'll see it comes in play when you're configuring them. So let's put the coolant in delivery dock 1, and just a good way of working with this is using the right naming. So if you click on the freighter, you can see now that in input dock 1 it's receiving its coolant. Usually what I do is immediately give this a proper name so I can find it easier. So let's call this one coolant distribution. There we go. So now we know that this is the place we're gonna pick up the coolant from and send it over to other hubs or other distribution points in our factory. So let's say, for the sake of this not getting too complicated, I will just put another one on this island and I will call it coolant deposit. Okay. So now the input docks, the numbers are pretty crucial. So the freighter, you'll see in a bit, it has basically 4 cargo containers and they correspond to the dock the items come into. So the freighter's number 1 cargo container will be able to pick up the coolant. So 2, 3, and 4 won't be able to pick anything up because there's nothing coming on in those inputs. So let's go ahead and set up our freighter. So you can do this by either clicking on a freight hub and go to freighter control, or immediately opening freighter control from the top menu. So let's add a new freighter and let's call it coolant distribution. Let's give it a color. Yeah, pink sounds good. So we want the freighter to go from this freight hub to that one, and I've named them appropriately, so I should be able to find the hubs very easily in the drop down. So we want the coolant distribution where the coolant will be picked up, so we can click once for load. That basically means pick this up. So this button corresponds to the one in the cargo slot. These other ones correspond to 2, 3, and 4. So now we're picking it up from this freight hub and we want to drop it off in coolant deposit. So we know that the cargo will be in slot 1. So we're loading slot 1. So we have to offload by clicking twice in the other freight hub. So now when we press apply changes, we should see our freighter coming in, and you'll see that it will be picking up accordingly. So from input 1 in its slot 1, and if all goes well, it's gonna drop it in slot 1 as well. So now you can see that this output dock has 500 coolant in it, and that's kind of it. So now we can move it out there, and you'll see the freighter keeps doing it as long as you don't change anything, basically. So it's just gonna continuously take from port 1 and drop in port 1 on this one. So that's kind of like the basic setup. What's important is to always name your freighters correctly on your freight hubs as well. Give them a logic name so you can find them easily and you don't end up with a mess or freighters doing wrong things. Because important to note is as well, if we change the input type here, the dock will still expect coolant. So if you want to change that, you actually have to remove the contents of the dock. And what happened now is the freighter picked up the coolant, so it has 0 input in it, so it doesn't have a recipe, so to speak, so it can take on in a new thing. But it's something to keep an eye for, because you can mess up. Yeah, of course, now it can't deliver data shards here because the output dock is expecting coolant, so it will keep the cargo until it can drop it off somewhere, which is not like a situation you want to be in. So yeah, that's kind of the basics of setting up like a distribution with freighters. Now let's take a look at a more advanced setup. Well, not really advanced, but something that will come in handy in a lot of your factories. So imagine like this is an island where we're producing a lot of blue paint, something you'll need a lot of in this game. So what's happening is I'm producing 240 and the freight hub is just taking in whatever I can put into it. So you'll see the max it can take in is 1920, but yeah, because of the fact that it's constantly picking it up, it shouldn't fill up too much. So what's happening here is I'm sending the blue paint to another factory, which is using 2 painters, which basically means I'm consuming 120 paint per minute, but I'm producing 240. So I know that's why counters are super handy in the outputs of freighters. I still have 120 left, so I can make another factory that also uses 120. So what's happening in this case is that I'm perfectly producing 240 and consuming in different islands or through different freight hubs, I'm consuming all of it. So how does that look in the freighter configuration? So if I go to freighter control, I can see here, by the way, if you click on a freight hub, you can see which freighters pass by there. So I know Blue Paint Freighter 2 is passing by there. And I can see it's picking up here and dropping off in both the deposits with the same load. So what happens is it will drop off all of its cargo if there's room, and then it will actually move to the next freight hub without cargo. So you'd think that, yeah, this one will never get paint, but it kind of works like an overflow system. So whenever this freight hub is full, so you can see here now this is nearly full. What happens is that if the freighter picks up, like, let's say 200 pieces and it can only deposit 100 here, it will keep 100 and it will try to deposit it in the next freight hub if you've configured it like that. So eventually, because I'm also only using 120 here, the freight hub will overflow and the freighter will be able to pick up the excess resources and drop it off in the next one. And because this 120 and 120 is exactly 240 I'm producing, the system will just auto-regulate automatically at some point. So now there will never be any blockages, there will never be any items backing up, because literally what's happening is I'm producing 240 and I'm consuming 240. The only thing to keep in mind though is the distance your freight hubs are from each other do play a role. So if you place them too far from each other, the freighter will take a longer time to actually pick up the resources being inputted into the freight hub. So that might mean you have to use 2 freighters, for example, if the freighters are too slow to pick up the produced resources. But in this case, it's obviously not a problem. So yeah, overflow freighters, it's a thing. Works well. That's kind of like the most important things you should know, I guess, or the most practical things you can use in your factory. If you want to push it a bit further, you can actually have them be multi-purpose. So this is kind of the same setup, only with yellow paint. So the yellow paint is distributed to these 2 freight hubs, but I'm also using the last freight hub to pick up something. So what's happening here is that I'm depositing the yellow paint. You see it's not full yet, so it's the yellow isn't reaching this point yet. But what happens here is I'm actually also sending something in the last freight hub. So you'll see that this item here, I want it to go back to the first freight hub, which is coming out here. So how does that look in the setup? Well, it's like this. So this is the paint coming in, and then I'm using my dock 4 to pick up at this one. So I'm picking the module up here and I'm dropping it off here again. So if you run out of freighters or you want to do multiple operations at once, it's perfectly possible. Just keep an eye on the docks themselves so you don't start mixing up resources. It can get pretty complicated. There's also the drop off and pickup, which if needed I can have another academy about. But yeah, this is kind of like the basics and the most practical thing you can do for freighters. So yeah, let us know if you have any more questions. I hope you learned something today, and yeah, have fun with the freighters. That's a wrap for this episode of Modulus Academy. Make sure you're following us so you don't miss the next one. See you on the factory floor.